Well, in 2017, Bishop Tim was appointed as a new bishop. So he made his assessment of the diocese. In 2018, I was appointed in a general pastoral role. But one of the key things he wanted addressed was pastoral planning, and that was the term he was familiar with, and sort of anyone been working in church in these areas for the last couple of decades is familiar with. At the end of 2018, he held a forum looking at the renewal of the diocese, the mission renewal of the diocese. And it came up with some, and that forum was only about 30 people, and it came up with some proposals. And then in 2019, the diocese got flooded. That was a serious event, and that really knocked out the year. And in 2020, we got COVID like everyone else. Thankfully, not as serious, but in that time, we worked out, we started discussing with priests, and the bishop put a proposal to them, put a diagnosis to them of where we were, and engaged them in that dialogue. And 85 to 90% of our priests are from overseas, so we're dealing with a different dynamic here. I mean, it's more common around the country now, but that's where we started. And by the end of that year, we had a proposal for how we would have parish consultation in 21, leading to an assembly. So the assembly didn't just happen. We had a whole lot of feeding to that, and every parish did a report. We put the reports together, we collated them, identified the issues, and that became the agenda for the assembly in September 21. And out of that, then the bishop promulgated 6 parish common directions because we asked parishes, do you think that we should be doing things together as parishes, and what would they be? They said definitely yes. And the assembly then, working with papers, worked out what they would be. And the bishop promulgated 6 directions. And that became our guide for how we went forward. So that was the catalyst, that was the path we took, and that's where we ended up. I guess the next part of your question is, so how do we move from those 6 directions to implementing? There are the directions. And in moving on them, and in what the bishop promulgated, there were some quite specific recommendations. So it wasn't as though it was a very broad thing. There were some very specific things about how we did these areas, but there are the 6 of them. And the central one is number 2. And the whole purpose of it was basically to reset parish focus for mission, going deeper and going wider. And that's referring to discipleship formation and to evangelisation. And the way to do that in the first instance, we believed, was the first common direction. In other words, you've got to have the leadership, a mission-focused leadership in parishes to do it. So that's what we focused on first. And the reason is that would open up to the common directions that followed from number 3 down to the end. But unless we've got mission-focused leadership and planning with it in parishes, nothing will happen in a strategic and intentional way. Things don't happen by accident. So that was the motivation for going forward. Now, what we did then was we had to look at, well, how do we go about then supporting this implementation? So a couple of things happened. One, as per the promulgation of the bishop, a Diocesan Mission Renewal and Planning Commission was set up. The second thing was that around the diocesan staff, those that we had, plus other volunteers, we set up a parish mission support team. And the third thing was, and a critical thing was, that the bishop resourced and appointed mission renewal advisors to actually walk with parishes. And we think that was a critical point because some of this stuff is not stuff that we as Catholics are used to. Therefore, we had to walk with them and walk people through things in order to get a different sort of mindset and a different sort of approach and form some new habits. in both thinking and doing. So our focus was to do that and do those things. And so we came up with some very specific approaches. We did draw on material and experience of places around the world that where parishes have taken on this journey and have told their story. So they're fairly commonly known amongst people who've been working in the area. So the Rebuilt story, the Divine Renovation story, and others that are becoming more known. So we drew on that material as well. So we made some discoveries just in terms of what was important. We had a look at breaking open the third common direction, which was focusing parish ministry, liturgy and ministry for mission. There's a whole lot of experience and also literature on what are common elements that make a parish healthy. And normally 5 are named, but also in the same breath, 2 others are there as well. One's leadership and the other's resourcing and admin. So we put them all together to make 7. And basically what we put out there, and this is behind our planning, is what we're trying to do is help parishes get healthy in all these body of Christ systems. And here's the insight that we gained. So in terms of what the parish mission is, basically we take the Great Commission, which is pretty common now. So Jesus says, go and make disciples. That's actually what we're sent to do. And when you have a look at these 7 systems, which are on the screen there, what we find in the average Catholic parishes and most Catholic parishes is that the 2 that are weakest are the 2 that are in fact essential: discipleship formation and evangelisation. And when we say weakest, parishes will put their hand up and say, yeah, no, we haven't got a way of doing that. Evangelisation, what we call going wider, we don't know how to do that. Some people even say we tried that once and it didn't work. And nor do we have a discipleship formation notion that in fact there's a journey that we all need to go on to go deeper in relationship with Jesus. And the 2 together are in fact essential. And so our insight is, and has been, that all the other systems are meant to do those 2 things. In other words, if we get to an end of a year or a period and we ask ourselves as a Catholic parish, how have we grown as disciples? And people look at you and think, what? How many new Christians have you made? What? They're just not the Catholic questions, or they haven't been. They used to be, but they're not now. And so what we're trying to say to parishes is we've got to use all of these to help this happen. And if we can do that bit by bit, what's going to happen is they're going to give energy to everything else. The arrow's going to reverse. So that's a bit of our big picture in terms of how we're trying to help parishes plan. So the second part of all of this is that in terms of leadership, we've set up new parish leadership groups or structures. So we've moved and are moving from Parish Pastoral Council, Parish Finance Council arrangement to a Parish Leadership Team, Parish Mission Council, and a Parish Mission Finance Council. Finance Council, yes, much the same functions as a Finance Council that we used to, except what we're trying to emphasise is the missionary key, the missionary lens through which it does its work. However, the other 2 are different. So a leadership team, and that's starting to grow, I think, around Australia. Different parishes are taking that on. And its job is to actually oversee and lead the everyday work and operation of the parish, again, focused on the mission of the parish. Parish Mission Council, it's got a very specific job here, and that is to actually pull together a parish mission plan. So its job is to think, and its job is to try to express that in a mission plan. And there's no reason why a parish pastoral council, as we've known them, can't do that. It sure can, but our experience is they don't. The reason is they're too busy trying to do other things. They're planning event to event and what's next, and you've got people that generally are getting older, they've been there a long time, no one's there is replacing them, so their focus and activity is very much reduced, and it's getting the basics done. So what we've done is we've actually given a group permission and a responsibility to think, and that's the difference. And we're working through that process now with parishes, helping them establish and then travelling with them as they take on these new roles with resources and so on and so forth. So that's a long nutshell, but that's how we moved from the assembly to moving forward into implementation. At the same time, I'll let you know that a number of parishes, 14 in fact, have gone through a process of reconfiguring into 5. So some places have taken on that as well as then forming new leadership groups. So it's been a big journey in the last 12 months. I think there are a couple of aspects to this. The first is the ideas themselves. I think the ideas have been reasonably well received for those who have heard them, and that would be many people, but they're generally focusing in from different perspectives. But the ideas, I think, have been received. I've been in lots of forums and I've heard no one say, oh, that's a stupid idea, that's a, etc., etc. So there's a certain common sense about them, and I think they're seen as, okay, well, there's some reasonable thoughts about how we might go forward. The second part of it, of course, is actually doing them. And people seem to accept there's a need for change. That's pretty common around the place. But generally, we don't like to change. People want the change to happen without affecting them. And that's just a reality we know about ourselves as people. However, I think as that plays out, we're going to find out how things are received or not, because people generally wake up and become very active when something in their life, or their church life, their parish life, actually changes because it's seen as a better response to the mission that Jesus gives us today. So I think that story is an ongoing one. Now, the reality is that this is fairly recent. So the leadership groups are only been around a few months, and the Mission Council, for example, it's still engaged in forming its mission plan. So, you know, we're in early days. I think that question is going to be an interesting question, maybe in 6 months, and certainly in a year or so. There are a couple of obvious things. And if we're saying that the whole centre of the purpose of our existence is to actually go and make disciples, to grow as, become deeper, and to invite others into relationship with Jesus, and all that involves, then there's 2 things to start with. Are we growing as disciples? And that would seem like a nebulous question to people. However, it's only nebulous because we don't actually ask it generally. We haven't developed the language even to think about it, and let alone think about it as a parish. So, but it's a fair question. If we're about making disciples, or have we made any? Are we better ourselves? And have we given ourselves any way to judge or make an assessment? So having those sorts of conversations in parishes as normal, that's going to be a great indicator about whether we're being successful and fruitful. Secondly, how many new people have actually come? How many have joined us? Who are we evangelising? Where are they? Can you find any? It's a good question. We're a bit like, as has been described, look, we're like a boat. Often we're moored in the harbour, and some fish actually swim around and try to jump in. Well, sometimes we even put up boards or barriers so they can't even get in. Like, that's a bit of a caricature, but it's not far from the truth at times. So there's two things. Now, on the way to that, of course, it's a long journey, and we're never given an open slather, nor all the support. We have one hand, or if not both hands, behind our back, half a leg's been cut off, and we're proceeding as best we can in difficulty. So we've got to give ourselves a bit of time to work through this. So I think that things like has the parish got discipleship growing pathways? Have you got anything in place? I do not know a parish at the moment. I know a couple, and I'd know of a couple, but here in Australia that could say yes, we do. Secondly, does everyone know what those pathways are? Thirdly, is everyone on it? Pathway? And fourthly, does everyone realise that they're sort of on a Jesus team here in this place, and that they're trying to support this happening? And you can ask the same set of questions about evangelisation pathways. Does everyone know that key purpose for our existence as a parish is to reach people that are not in the parish? Two, does everyone know what the pathways are? What are we actually offering? What tools have we got in place? Does everyone know what they are? Does everyone care about what they are? Is everyone praying about what they're meant to do and who they're meant to reach? So they're without the definite outcomes, just doing that's a sign of an attempt to get through. It's sort of more observations as we're in the midst of the fast journey ourselves. So pretty convinced that you can't just leave it to parishes to find their own way. Expect them to. The world's too complex now, and we're dealing with lots of headwinds. So parishes need, and they say they need, support. So I think you need a whole sense of and a reality of diocesan support around this that gets expressed in both dialogue, the vision, some sort of framework, some pathways, consistent leadership, resource support. Those sorts of things, are needed. Many people say in parishes say, look, we're happy to do something if we knew what to do. And I think the diocese has got a role, and as have all the other stories around the world, in helping that happen. So that would be one thing. I think the other thing is the parishes do need resourcing, and I think it's more than just saying, well, here you are, this is what to do. You've done the seminar, now go and do it. I think it's such a shift in thinking for particularly long-time Catholics that have been very faithful, devoted. They've grown up in the church, and their way of doing things has been well set. It's such a shift that they need accompaniment. We all do, walking through this. It's not enough because what we do is we default to what we know. And we're generally forced into that by the pressure of life. We'd like to do something different, but we just haven't got time, or we're too tired. Or I've been in this role in the parish for 33 years, no one's stepping up. Something more is needed there. And formation's therefore a big part of that. So the challenge, I think, for dioceses and for parishes, anyone trying to lead parishes, is where do we get the formation to help people, onto something that they feel there's new life in. And I think I think my takeaway is probably the parish has to have something intentional in both the discipleship growth in growing area and in evangelisation, the going wider and the going deeper. And generally to get that, you need leadership, and leadership can start it and kick it off and start to grow it. But the big aim is to change and make new the parish culture, which actually sees those things as, this is why we're here. Because I don't think that's what comes to mind if you ask the average person in the pews, why are we here? So I think that's the big one, and we have to keep that in mind. I am a fan of the saying, the main thing is to know the main thing and keep the main thing the main thing. And I think the diagnosis of us as parishes and as church today is that we're doing so many things that we can, and we're so pressured, we can forget what the main thing is if we knew it in the first place. But we don't sort of keep the main thing the main thing. And I think that's the big challenge that I see. And helping parishes do that is one of the things I think is really important.